Alright guys, welcome back to part 5 of the Cyclone build here with the big 24s. As you can see, I've made progress. I have the 200.4 mounted in there, and I also spent a lot of time running power and ground cables. This 200.4 has two separate boards, so there's a power and ground for each of them. I have power and ground ran for the 3000s, and I have power and ground for the 125.4. As you'll notice, it is dark in here, so all of that black suede is really cutting light. And if you go back to the last video where I was putting acrylic, working acrylic into the amp rack and getting the lighting in for it, it all plays together. I intended for this to be dark. I intended for the amplifiers to be the highlight of the install here. Down here I have my Helix processor, I have my limitless lithium, and as you guys can see, I have power and ground connected. I've ran all of my ground cables. I need to connect the two for the 3000s. I got my fuse block mounted and I'm routing cabling. So all of the cabling goes on the back side of this amp wall. So you will see no cabling here. It will just be amplifiers. The downside to that is when I come inside, I currently have a mess of power cables that all need to get cleaned up. And over here, I'll show you guys what I have for that. I have this guy, which is for 0 gauge, and this guy for 4 gauge. And the way these work is it clamps onto the cabling and you can group your cables together. You guys will see more of that later. But I sat in here yesterday. My intent was to do each amplifier individually as far as power, ground, speaker, and RCAs. But I decided my back just was not going to enjoy that. It was painful. So I went ahead, ran all power, and then I'll tackle RCA and speaker for the bottom one, and then I'll move up the chain. And hopefully by the end of this video, the amp rack is in, everything is wired, and I will be ready to move on to the horn installation. All right, as you can see, some time has passed since the last clip. I went ahead, got all of the amplifiers installed, and I was talking about going from bottom amplifier, wiring everything, moving up the stack, wire that. I found it easier to run all power cable, all RCA, all speaker cable to the proper locations through the back side of the amp rack, and then just bring amplifiers in and connect them. The major issue I had was leaning over into the vehicle for two reasons. One, I hurt my back in the military, and two, I had a TBI in 2008. So as a result of the TBI, leaning into an engine bay, leaning into a trunk, working in kick panels, anytime I'm leaning over, my head messes up. I get sick to my stomach, I get overheated, it's really weird. And then the lower back injury, I just, leaning over anyway hurts. That's the reason I raised the work surfaces in the wood shop. But it took forever. It was about a week from the time I started this to the time I finished to get to this point. So if we take a look, you see I've got the big 200.4 is here. I've got a 3000.1 for one sub, a 3000.1 for the other sub, and the 125.4. Now the 200.4 is going to power my 8s and my 6.5s. The 125 is going to power the 3s and tweets, and obviously 3000 per sub. So down here I've got my Helix, I've got my lithium, and I've got my fuse and distribution block. This 0 gauge is going to get replaced. I'm waiting on my 4 gauge lugs to come in. I was one short, so I've got 0, 0, 4, 4, and this will be 4 as soon as the lugs come in. This switch I have to install for the lighting for the amp rack, so it's not on. I originally intended on having this on a remote power, but I decided it would be best to put it on a switch so I can turn it on and off. That way it's not glowing as I drive down the road at night. But if I connect real quick, you guys can see what that looks like. And that was the intent with this, was to just have black everywhere and then draw attention to the amplifiers and showcase the amplifiers. So really, I just wanted the amplifiers on display. Now down here, I'm working on, I've got the helix, I've got the lithium, and the fuse block. I'm not sure what kind of material I'm going to cover the floor with. I'm also not sure if I'm going to leave this stuff exposed as it is, or if I'm going to hide it. I just haven't fleshed that out in my head, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Right here on this floor, you can see where I ran a rabbet bit right here. So that rabbet that I've cut is going to work into the piece that I'm going to be installing back here behind this battery. I've got air ride connections here, and my air ride controller will sit here. I also have another piece that's going to sit here that I'm waiting on to arrive. So that is where I am with this. Now if we go into the wood shop, I'll show you guys, I talked about the rabbet bit, I'll show you guys the setup that I'm going to use on the floor back there. So this is the rabbet bit I used in there, and this is a rabbet bit. So this cuts the recessed area you saw there, so you're left with a piece of material that looks like this where the rabbet is cut. Now this template for the area that's going to go behind it, that template is there so that I'm going to cut a piece out of 1/4 inch, but I'm going to use it as a half lap joint. So when you cut a rabbet and then you cut a rabbet on another piece, if you alternate the way the rabbets are cut, that's a half lap joint, and those pieces always fit together flush. So across the top here, it is always flush as long as those two pieces are sitting together. Now the advantage to that is it can never be out of whack. I use this a lot on trunk floors. I use it on beauty panels and stuff where that I don't want the pieces to be off. I've actually used it in a Scion XB, oddly enough. I used it in a Scion XB where it was a 2-piece floor that looked factory. One side was a sub-enclosure, the other side still gave you access to the spare tire. There was storage there, and the half lap joint allowed everything to sit there, look factory, and never have a wonky look to it on top where it transitions from, like, say, the left side to the right side. So half lap joints, kind of easy. All you do is cut it on a router bit. All right, I just routed out the panel here to close off this back side, and as you guys can see, I laid out, maybe able to see in the video, there it is. I laid out the center line so that my air ride controller is located there in the center of the vehicle. I don't want anything to be off center, so as you notice, everything lines up. Another thing I did when I cut the rabbet here, I'm using 1/4 inch material for this closeout panel, and I've got about 1/8 of an inch. I'm about 1/8 of an inch proud up here from the surface of this 1/4 inch to the top of my 3/4. And the reason for that is when you add material to upholstery, like, say, I think I'm just going to use trunk liner here. When you use that material, your piece grows in dimension, so it becomes thicker and it becomes longer and wider by the thickness, twice the thickness of your material. And the reason I say twice the thickness is because as you wrap over this end and over this end, you've added the thickness of your upholstery material there and there. The same thing happens here and here. So if it's tight here, if your panel is tight and you have to press it into place here, it's going to be extremely tight once you upholster it. So I like keeping tight tolerances, but sometimes it's beneficial to leave yourself a little bit ahead of time. Think in advance, and that is the reason I have this 1/8 inch where this 3/4 is 1/8 inch proud of the 1/4 inch material, and that is because once I wrap both of these, Let me get this out of the way here. Once I wrap over and to the bottom side of this, and then once I wrap here and down onto the rabbet, when I lay these pieces back together, they will sit flush right here up top. It won't be uneven. So I planned ahead for upholstery, and when everything is there and together, it's going to be nice and flush across the seam. All right, so I just got this thing covered, and I went ahead, pressed in the air ride controller here. As I did, as I was pressing it down, I wanted to go ahead and trim some more off of here that I forgot to trim. So this guy's all covered now. The air ride controller is a tight press fit. Remember I told you that when you wrap over the edges, like I've done here, you guys can see where I've wrapped over it. When you wrap over the edges, everything grows in dimension. So I did have this set up as I could use 1024 screws and mount it, but this is a press fit and it's not going anywhere. Other things I've done, I'm going to add this. I took black nylon strap and I made a pull handle, and that's as simple as cutting a length twice as long as you need, taking a lighter, melting, used a soldering iron, and I put holes through it so I can mount it here to the panel. And now anytime I need to remove the panel, I can just grab this loop and raise it up. So I'm going to go ahead and get that installed. As you see here while I'm doing this, other things I've done is I added ribs here to reinforce this panel, and the reason for that is since it is 1/4 inch PVC, it is kind of soft, has some spring and give to it. So I went ahead and added these braces, and as you notice, this one here is angled, this one has a notch cut out of it, and you'll see that in just a second when I take it over there. But this guy is strong, has very little give to it, and when I take it over to the vehicle and put it in place, it's going to sit perfect. So now it's just time to clean this guy up and take it to the vehicle. All right, to give you guys a better view of what I did here, prior to deciding to install this limitless 25 amp lithium charger, I had a 4-gauge run that came here from the fuse block down through a grommet to the solenoid for the air ride. Now when I decided to install this, I needed a way to have the positive lead and the negative lead constantly connected. Since this is going to be a permanent install, I needed a way to connect that to the battery, and I decided to do that through this 4-gauge line for the air ride, because when I cut this and I hooked the lithium to it, I have a 12-volt connection up this 4-gauge back to the battery, and my negative is over here at my ground point, which connects to the battery. So that was a simple way to do that. This is permanently mounted, and I've got my isolated terminal and the boot installed there. They do not come together, you have to order them separately, and I will put links in the description. So the next thing to do is to put this limitless lithium in, and same thing, 3M dual lock, and I ran it in this direction so that when it's in the vehicle, when I need to remove it, this dual lock is strong. When I need to remove it, I'll just pry from the front, or in the vehicle, it's the back, I'll just pry from this point instead of trying to lift from here or here. I can pry, and once you get this stuff coming loose, it will release, but otherwise you are stuck with things in place. So next step is to get that guy and that hole and start making all these connections. right, so there is everything finally reassembled. And as you look at this, you can see that what the goal was. I just wanted to show off amplifiers. I've got the processor over here, I've got the lithium here, and over here is my fuse block with the logo. Everything's labeled. I've got the QR code you can scan to see right now a full image album of the build. That will become a video walkthrough of the vehicle. I have my air ride controller, and my little loop I was talking about is right here. I'll pull that up. I have access to everything inside there. That's where the lithium charger is. And on the bottom side, I have the 110 volt plug. That's a waterproof RV plug. I can just go to an event, plug in power, and I don't have to mess with carrying a charger around. So that is the build right now, and tomorrow I'm going through the entire brake system. I finally got the master cylinder, the booster, everything that I need to completely go through the brakes. That is all here. So tomorrow I'll go through the brakes, and then I'm going to go pick up the 24s and we're going to load those. So if you guys are seeing this, what do you think it's going to do? It's two 24s powered by 3K each in this little vehicle. So it may get loud. We'll find out. But I've got text coming in, and I want to get off here. I will see you guys next time.